Welcome, everybody. My name is Lorena, and today it's a very special day because we're here with Tori Brown, the author and game designer of Boats for Women. Hi, Tori.
Hello, Lorena. How are you?
I'm fine. How about you?
Good, thanks. It's good to be here.
Perfect. I'm glad you're here. I'm so excited to have this little interview because, well, now it's going to be 8th of March, so Women's Day. And we are Devere. We are so excited to have this game finally in our hands and be publishing all around the world and having this game for everybody. So yeah.
I am so excited that Devere has faith in the title, in the design, and in your audience, that people want to play it and that they're going to be able to play it in the way that they're most comfortable in their mother tongue. It's really exciting for me as a game designer to be able to reach a whole new audience of people.
Sure. I mean, for me, the first time I've got the game on my hands, I said, "Oh my god, this game is going to be a hit." And mostly because the theme is very important. And right now, 2025, I think the game theme is so relevant, and it's so important to have board games and things that speak themes that are relevant to the historic moment that we're going through right now.
Yeah, the game is a historical board game, right? So I studied and researched and put all of my love and hope and joy into this story about the American women's suffrage movement, and it's a game about ratifying an amendment to the American Constitution. So there's right, politics and education, but really the game to me is about the power of people to improve society and make progress in our culture. It is about how much we can accomplish together, how much we stand to gain by bringing more people in and making society more inclusive, making government more responsive, making our culture more equal. And that's not only is like a timeless, I think, theme, but right now, given where the world is it's never been so important, right? Like this feeling like maybe we're backsliding, maybe people are breaking apart. I want folks right now to play Votes for Women and think about what they can do next, whether it's in their neighborhood, in their city, in their country, in the world. What happens next?
Correct. And a lot of people said that, well, it compared the games with Twilight Struggle, and also Making the President. I think it's considered a war game, but do you self consider this game like a war game or more like historical inspired um, moment on history?
I think if you like war games, there's a lot to like in Votes for Women. It's a card driven game, and certainly titles like
Hmm.
Twilight Struggle have, like, I think, perfected or done so much to make card driven games interesting and fascinating. I think that if you really like historical games, then there's a lot to love here. The artwork, the flavor text, the, sort of 70 years of history.
Hmm.
And if you like board games, this is like a really interesting uh way to maybe get into some of these, right, sort of more complicated or more historical driven, right? I I think there's a lot to love in Votes for Women for everybody.
For sure. That's a thing that I have pretty clear on my mind. What's what's the moment that you thought this game needs to exist? What's that moment that the key moment that you think I have to make a game about this topic?
So I first thought of the idea in August of 2019. America celebrated 100 years, the centennial of
Mhm.
the 19th Amendment's ratification in 2020. And I read an article a month or a year before that moment happened that talked about all the plans and all the things that were going to go on and the ways that, you know, Congress had given money to different states, and thought like, oh, like there's this big anniversary coming up, like, you know, all of this content is gonna sort of be coming. Like, I wonder how I could translate 70 years of history and the push and pull of this struggle into a board game. And it really started to come together, I think in May of the next year. So there was, I don't know, you know, a little more than 6 months of sort of just like pushing and pulling and thinking it through. And then I started on the work in May of 2020. And,
Mhm.
you know, there's some other things happening in the world of May of 2020. We were, you know, a few months into the worst of the pandemic. And I think that like I had a lot of I had a lot of time on my hands. I wasn't working at the time. I had nowhere to go. So that's when I think the sort of like the pieces really started to come together. And I started talking with my publisher and developer about like what is it like, what does it mean, what does it look like, how does it come together, what's the tension in the game. And the Kickstarter kicked off on the anniversary, the 100th anniversary, so that was August. So it was basically a year of kind of like put some pieces together, play some other games, get some inspiration, and then we were off to the races. We did not have a lot of the final pieces together for that first Kickstarter, but the Kickstarter helped put some play tests together to hire just like some kick-ass graphic designers like Bridget Delicato, and to make sure that the rulebook was great. And so, you know, it didn't then release until December of 2022. So it was another sort of year and a half of just a lot of like intensive work and wait, and intensive work and wait.
Can't wait.
It has to be the industry kind of goes.
Of course. I mean, there's any aspect of the game that originally you had envisioned to be super clear, and later on with the time, as the game progress was going on, it there's any aspect or mechanic that it was on the printer and it gave it away, or
So I think, you know, in my mind, this was always a two-sided game. You know, it plays great at two-player, and there's also a
Mhm.
solitaire version, and you can play up to four or just sort of teams. But I always, in my mind, saw the game as suffrage versus opposition. And I think it's really important for folks to play opposition, especially if they don't, right? Like, it's not about not wanting women to have rights. It's about understanding how opposition to social movements foments and creates the roadblocks and the way that the status quo entrenches itself. I think I learned so much from creating the opposition deck. You know, it wasn't just a bunch of like old men that hated women. A lot of women were involved in campaigning
Right.
against suffrage. And I think it's important for us to be honest about that and to think about what we have to overcome when we take part in social movements to create change. I think that there were certainly cards or some pieces of research that I thought were going to be really important, but then as we're balancing out the decks, kind of just didn't, you know, didn't matter as much because of the way that the narratives drew themselves and the way that the gameplay asked us to think about geography more strategically. The last piece that came together on mechanics is the congressional track, and this is the moment that the game, you know, you're playing out in the states, you're trying to build all this power so that a majority of states will ratify the supermajority will ratify the amendment, and then states have to start voting, right? And so in Congress, that was in 1919, the,
Mhm.
you know, finally enough power in Congress to vote for the amendment to send it off to the states. So the congressional track became the mechanic that tracks power in Congress and creates a moment where states start voting. And in order to make that a balanced mechanic, I had to go in and sort of do some more research and find, I don't know, congressional testimony and moments where
Mhm.
the balance of Congress really made a difference. And so a lot of the game was driven by research, but then this became the sort of one point where the mechanic needed the research to backfill to make sure that it made sense when you're pulling and pushing columns into place. So it surprisingly, like, oh no, I've got this all set, I've got my decks. And then you sort of like get to this point where like a new idea happens. You're like, all right, now what am I going to have to lose in my decks, and how do I sort of add that in as an effective mechanic for the congressional track.
So it felt natural to add this type of mechanics as you intensified that research. So it felt like you needed to put that key aspect of the game to be more complete on that, I think, no?
Yeah, exactly. That the role of Congress is small but not unimportant. In Article 5 of the Constitution, Congress needs to send the amendment to the state in order for the states to ratify the amendment and add it to the Constitution. And so creating that mechanic and then ensuring that the narrative of the game, the cards were adding and pulling columns into Congress, that was driving it, added another layer of complexity, but it kept with the storyline and the accuracy of the history, and required some sort of extra research just to ensure that the folks that were pulling columns out of Congress were actually opposed. And when you read the flavor text on some of those cards, they're saying some real like terrible things about women, particularly about Black women, because race is such an important piece of how and when suffrage came into the United States. That we were telling one complete, accurate, but compelling story through the game.
Exactly. And that is reflected also in the game, because I checked when checking the game, all the pieces inside the side of the suffragist, it has different colors on the meeples. So I found that very interesting, because it's not like mono thing. It's like pluricultural, but there's inside the movement there's a lot of different opinions and different drives on inside the movement by
That's
itself.
right. Yep. And it's one of the first things people ask me when I'm setting up play copies at conventions or doing different events, right? So I'm like you just saw those pictures, right? There's orange, right? The opposition is a monolith. There's just this one sort of big a mass of
Mhm.
opposition. But like people ask, like, what does the purple and yellow mean? It's like, well, it turns out that there's a lot of diversity in the movement. There was racial diversity, there was class diversity, and there was diversity on tactics and about should they go just in the states, state by state, should they try to get Congress to do something. Folks tried to get the Supreme Court to do something, and even then wasn't really a friend to progress. And so the way that the purple and yellow meeples work in Votes for Women represents the divisions within the movement on all of those lines. And as you play the game, you see that opposition and suffrage have ways that they can manipulate or exploit some of those divisions. And so you can't
Mhm.
put only purple out into the states, because opposition can come along and wipe out all of the purple from the state. And if you've overbalanced, then you've lost too much strength. You want to keep things moving sort of in track side by side, just like the movements needed to work side by side with their different tactics. And up my side might get some of the backlash or the repercussions from the actions that the other side took, because we are one movement. But it wasn't just one idea, one person, one way of thinking. There's a lot sort of feeding into, and I think just like social movements today, we have disagreements inside how to do things the best, but we know that ultimately our goals are the same, and that when we
Exactly.
have differences in how to accomplish those goals, we do it constructively with an understanding that we are all on the same side and that the opposition can exploit the differences between us.
Yeah, maybe the approach is different or it can be diverse, but our goal it's the same. It's unity, and it's obviously um, the right to vote, and more rights for women, and at that time, and also right now in 2025 also. So I
Yeah,
think
and
that's important to highlight.
who gets to be a part of society? Who gets to exist? Who gets to use the bathroom? Who gets to use the voting booth? Who gets to go to school? Who gets to be in power? Right? Like, these are important conversations that we continue to have. And someone like me, the more the merrier, right? That a diverse
Exactly.
society is a stronger society, and that we have so much more to gain by bringing new voices in and ensuring that all of our ideas are represented, and that the beauty of society is all of that coming together for something greater, rather than pushing people away outside saying you don't count, you don't get to decide, you don't have any power, which creates, I think, a real drab, a real sad kind of society.
So true. And following with that, I have a question. Um, what was your biggest challenge at creating the game? In this case, for example, the topic, or maybe the research, or maybe just focusing on the suffragist um, movement only in the United States? And why not make it more general?
Sure. I mean, this is my first game, so
Yeah.
just the challenges were at every point it felt like I was I was faced with new challenges or new difficulties on what I was doing, right? And so doing something you've never done before can be kind of hard, but I had really great
Very.
people to so hard, right? But I had really great people to work with. I had folks that had done it before. I had folks who, like even Jason Matthews, who designed Twilight Struggle, was really helpful in how I thought about the cards and how they could connect together. I think that, a big challenge, the sort of a very American story, was how to squarely deal with race in the game, because it was such an animating force in the suffrage movement, a way that it divided suffragists against each other. In the wake of the 14th Amendment and giving Black men the right to vote, some suffragists got really mad and said, why should Black people get to vote when I can't? It was like an educated white woman get to vote, right? Like in
Yeah.
the way that it was in the research, the way that people opposed suffrage because they were worried about Black women voting, or that it would put more attention on Black people voting in general, especially in the South. And so how to deal with that fairly and accurately, right? If the one player decided to exploit these divisions, would it take some Black folks out of the deck? Would it silence their voices, or would it harm other ways right in the future that they would be able to amass power? And what was a respectful but accurate and honest way of dealing with some of that? And I also just think that like the challenge of like whittling down, right? That it's 70 years of history. There's thousands of amazing people, like, that you could put in, um just to like get to people that folks hadn't heard of, right? So we were ensuring that there was some new, but there's still some familiarity. And I think, on this question of like, why not a global suffrage movement, right? Like people starting in New Zealand and working across the globe are
Mm.
empowering women at different rates due to different sort of forces inside of their countries. I think that because I started with the premise of a constitutional amendment, that we would have this map and that we need 36 states to ratify, that it just like, it's an American Constitution game.
Mm.
I would love to play a global suffrage game. I would kickstart that game. I would tell everyone to go buy it. I think that that would be phenomenal.
And following with that, with the characters to feel more familiar inside the game, maybe it's a random question, but if you had the chance to have a dinner with any suffragist along the way on the journey on I don't know, investigating your research for the game, there's any special historical figure, feminist or suffragist that you would like to sit down and talk about it?
Like, how do you pick your favorite child? How do I pick my favorite card from this game? There's a woman named Mary Church Terrell. She lived in Washington, D.C., where I used to live. She became politically active post World War I, when American troops came back overseas, and the federal government was withholding the bonuses that they promised to troops, especially to Black troops. So she got active in the pro-peace, anti-war movement, in organizing for the bonuses I think that her son was promised, and to create that, and became a suffragist based on those experiences. She spoke 3 different languages, and she testified in Sweden in all 3 languages, gave a speech about the importance of voting rights, and eventually became an anti-segregation activist, sitting in at lunch counters in Washington, D.C. to end segregation on racial lines in Washington. So, like, her career spans this like incredibly important time period. All of these issues. I've done anti-war organizing, I've done feminist organizing, I've done pro-peace and sort of racial justice organizing. So we have some like, not that I'm married to her, Jarrell, I don't barely speak one language, but she's just this really fascinating woman who I had never heard of before doing this research, who I felt like a geographic connection with, an issue connection, and to think of her as this like 75-year-old lady at a lunch counter getting drinks dumped on her, and like the way that Americans treated anti-segregation activists is not like in the movies, like it's pretty intense. And she like went all like, I would absolutely like to sit at a lunch counter with Mary Church Terrell and talk to her about her experiences.
And if you could play a board game with her, which one would be? Both
Oh,
for women,
that's
maybe.
obviously votes for women. I don't like, maybe she would enjoy Watergate, right? That was towards the end of her life. I think that Watergate is a spectacular game. I think it's pretty easy to learn. I think it's pretty fast and is like so well balanced, and you get to like play a little villain or play a little like good guy. There's obviously a lot that I took from Watergate. Maybe she'd enjoy another DC centered game.
Great. And just to finish up just a little bit this little chat with you, um, what do you hope the players of Votes of Women take away from this game after finishing the first play of Votes for Women? What do you want to inspire to, for example, for me, or young girls playing Votes for Women on Future with the Veer? Um, what would it be the message you want to transmit with Vote for Women?
First, I would want to be like, that was a fun game. Let's play it again sometime, right? Like, if nobody likes it, if nobody wants to play it, then like none of it matters, right? Nothing else matters. So first and foremost, I want to enjoy and have a good time. I want to play. I have a friend who would love this, or right, maybe I'll play with my grandma, or right, like so. But I think second, right, because there's always I think like there were so many women and men involved in the suffrage movement, most of whom will never know their names. They have faded into history, but we all can do something. And the importance of taking that step, to joining that club, to going to that meeting, to voting, to organizing a union, to like being involved matters more than just about anything. We all live on this planet. We all have something at stake, and we all need to have our say and our sort of like feet in the circle. And we don't do it because we'll get famous. We don't do it because we'll get rich. We don't do it because of any of these things. We do it because they say like sort of activism is rent for the life we live on this planet, and that there is nothing greater than finding a cause bigger than ourselves that we can be a part of. And I would love for people to think about the things they care about and the ways that they can join together to be powerful. There are some powerful people in this world, but no one is as powerful as we are together, and that we have to remind ourselves of that power and take it and seize that power so that we can restore the balance on our environment, ensuring that we have clean water and air to drink, on our schools, that everybody gets to go to a good school and reach their full potential. The voting box, we all have an equal voice in our government. These are things that are globally so important, and that we can really make a difference on when we come together.
That was wonderful, Tori. Everything that you said, I mean, I cannot be more agree with you. I think all women, men, anyone have to find their own voices and spread that idea. don't throw it away. If maybe you have an idea and you say, no, I won't say it, I won't think it, I won't share it with anyone because I don't think if it's important enough, or it would be relevant for someone to hear. But every voice, it's deserved to be heard. And I think it's so important to create a community and to speak your voice, because that voice will maybe resonate with somebody that you didn't thought initially that you will connect these ideas with, and you can create friendship, community, love. There's a lot of good things in this world, and we have to find that, and we have to fight for this, for this cause. And I think together, and finding unity within our communities and people, and fight for the things that we think it's important. So environment, rights, political situations, anything. I think it's important to everything. It's worth fighting for. So I
So well
think
said.
for
So
me,
well
yeah.
said.
Yeah. I mean, both for women, when I told you before, because I had the game in my hands and I said, this is going to make so much good in the world, having a board game that expresses these ideas. And also, don't let those people that fought for us, now we take the I don't know how
The
to say it,
torch.
like the torch. Yeah, they pass us the torch. And it's so important that their voices and their names don't get faded in history. So I think for me, this game, I need to thank you, Tori, to creating these types of games, because these that way we can remember those names, remember that key moments in history, and be aware of that we began in that line, and now we have the torch, and we need to work and pass the torch from the next generations. And we have to keep going, we have to keep fighting, we have to get things done. So,
Well, thank you
and
for playing it and for seeing it. And just like a huge thanks to Devere for seeing the potential in the game globally and for so many people in whatever government context would under whatever constitution we happen to be under. It's our government and we deserve a voice. And if we're going to keep that voice, we have to keep this work. I think you're right. We have to carry that torch and pass it forward.
and the last question, I promise. Do you think your next game will be inspired in another key moment in history, another historical big moment?
Oh,
Give me a
so
little hint.
I am such a big nerd. I don't know how it could. I think that there is so much to learn from history and especially from people powered movements, from the labor movement, from the environmental movement, right? Like the work that has been done is important to like remind ourselves that like we can do it, right? Like I can't imagine the first people to organize a union in the United States, how scared they must have been, how worried, how must have felt like they were up against all of the odds. And I want to like remind me and you and everyone that people in the past have faced really long odds, but by coming together, some sacrifice, some gain, some all like the hard, very, very hard work, we're able to make progress and that we live better lives because of them. And to think clearly and strategically about how we can work together to help future generations live better lives. Like I think the union, like labor movement, is a really interesting place where history and power, right? Like board games are about power. And I think that like so are unions, and so who has power, who how do we get it, and like how does it like exchange from the workers to the bosses and bosses to the workers. And I think the environmental movement, how they've come together, even if like I care about the water, I care about the air, well like we all care about it together. How do we work together to create change and to make the air we breathe healthier and all of it? So those are sort of like some of the things that I've been thinking in books that I've been reading to think about my next game, is how do we do it together, and what does that look like, and what can we learn to apply in our day-to-day lives?
That's amazing, Tori. Well, as Lin Manuel Miranda said, like history has its eyes on us, so we need to get everything that we said, uh, get it done and put it out there. And I'm full supporting for your next game and any game that you throw out there, please. I need to play more games made by you. So keep doing your job because you're amazing. The design of the game is amazing, and I've loved having this chat with you. Thank you for accepting this interview, and I hope we'll see you around. And hopefully, we can meet in person someday.
I'll play opposition. You can play suffrage, and I think it'll be great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tori. Have a super great day today.
Thank you too.
Bye bye.
Bye.